Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world. Thank you for so many of you joining, especially on what will be a Friday evening in many parts of the world, especially in India. A couple more minutes to let a few more people in. And yeah. Great. Okay, I think that's most people in the waiting room. So just wanted to say hello to everyone, and I'm going to hand it over to Lynn, who's going to take us through the arc of the webinar series before we introduce Dr. Shiva and Dr. Marya. And it's an honor to have them both with us today. Before I do that, maybe we'll start with a brief prayer, which was the opening text for the book. May this text, may this webinar series serve the healing of all beings, including the fallen deity of money and its offspring, shadow, and alibi, philanthropy. May the colonized mind and body be liberated, including our own. And for those of you who haven't seen the book, we're going to put that in the chat box. We'll put a link to it, and yeah, we're going to go deeper into some of the content lines. So maybe Lynn, you give us the arc.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, all. Good afternoon, good evening. I greet you from the places where you are, where you sit, the occupied or perhaps unoccupied lands where you are, the waters that flow, the storms that may be. Greet you and your ancestors and all the other beings that you come here with today. And today is our second in a 5 kind of part webinar series. And today we're honored to have 2 guests with us as we go into looking deeper at ontologies of separation, domination, extraction, and explore kind of what's going on with our way of being dualistic and what's going on with philanthrocapitalism. And this is the second in the arc after the first webinar series that some of you have been part of or may have listened into, where Alnoor and I spoke about kind of some of the key lines that we explore in the book, from paradox to possibility. And so today we're going to go deeper into some of what has, in a way, gotten us into this mess. And then we'll go in the next session, we'll really look at what are ways that we can be with hospicing modernity, pathways for transition. We'll have other guests with us there. Tokusin Ghost Horse, Lakota elder, Vanessa Andreatti, who wrote a beautiful book, Hospicing Modernity. And then in the session 4, we're really going to embrace other ways of being and knowing and sensing that allow us to find our way in these transition pathways. And with Bio Komolafe. And then session 5, we've left open to emergence. We have different feelings of what we may do, but we're going to keep listening in this for what really serves to go deeper into any of these lines that we explore in the book as an offering of living praxis of how we all find our way to be and to find the courage of how we get out of ontologies and systems of domination and oppression, and what is ours to do within this philanthrocapitalistic NGO-industrial complex in these times. So that's where we are. And perhaps I'll just say a few words about how we came to these speakers for today, and then Alnoor can offer a little bit more. But when we really go deep into ecology and we look at what the project was that hundreds and hundreds of years ago that dehumanized humans and thingified nature, and really where I've heard Dr. Shiva talk about the ecocide and the roots of that, and where the roots of Cartesian logics, the split of the mind body. It takes us right into what happened into ecological, into animate ways of being, of living, of being in earth and being in the commons and being with food, agriculture, of really living another way. And so it's interesting that ecology and economy have the same root. And so where we felt to start this exploration of ontologies of separation and extraction and domination is to really look at what's going on within agricultural, within food, within medicine, as these are some of the if I could say, front lines of where we're caught in this mess and how we have to reconsider what our responses are in this moment. And in addition, Dr. Shiva has done incredible scholarship and work, and Alnoor will introduce more, but specifically calling out philanthropy and the philanthrocapitalists. And so we really are just honored to have Dr. Shiva and Dr. Rupa Marya, who are really helping shape our minds and our hearts in these ways, in these days. So with that, I'll see what Alnoor wants to add to where we are in this webinar, and then start to introduce our speakers.
Yeah, and just, I guess, flow for today is Dr. Shiva is going to go first. We'll see how we feel with bio breaks, etc. And if anyone has strong urges or desires, let us know. It's only a 2-hour session, so we may go through all the way depending on what the energy and the flow is like. And then Dr. Marya will go second, and then Lynn and I will ask some questions, and all the speakers will have a moment to chat and converge, and then we'll open it up to the group. Last time we did the webinar format, and it was hard for people to interact, and so we've switched to a meeting format. So you could just raise your hand or put your question in the chat box, and we'll see how many we can get to. And we might batch. If there's a lot of questions, we might ask people to do 2-3 questions together, and then bring that into the middle and see where the resonance is. Yeah, does that sound good to everyone? Great, cool. Yeah, so we will start with Dr. Shiva. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Shiva, whose work I've admired and been influenced by hugely. Maybe one of the major influences in my political life from the anti-globalization movement onwards. And I'm going to read a little bit from her formal bio, not to embarrass you, Dr. Shiva, but just for context, and then I'll put it in the chat box as well. I won't read the whole thing, but I think what's key and important about her background is that she's a trained physicist and did her PhD in quantum mechanics, in the hidden variables of non-locality in quantum theory. She then moved to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and ecology, and was at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded an independent institute, which was the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology in Dehradun, which is her home base. And for years and years has done some of the most significant research on ecological and social issues with local communities and social movements. So she has not been doing independent think tank work, but has always been embedded in grassroots communities. In 91, she founded Navdanya, which is a national movement in India and has spread globally to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seeds, and the promotion of organic farming and fair trade. She also started Vijaya Vidyapith, which is the International College for Sustainable Living in the Doon Valley, in collaboration with Schumacher College. And she's won many awards. I won't list them here. One of them is the Right Livelihood Award, the Alternative Nobel Prize in '93, and many, many others. And she's really a living gem, and kind of the high watermark of activism and integrity and the integration of the spiritual and the political in these times. So it's an honor to have you, Dr. Shiva, and I'll put your bio in the chat box, but the floor is yours. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alnoor, and thank you, Lynn, and thank you to all of you who've put this together, and hello to Rupa. Good to see you again. Both because I've grown up in a post-colonial and pre-globalization India. an India whose civilizational foundations are non-dualism, are interconnectedness, are constantly a world in dynamic, self-organized, autopoietic change. The ontology of separation was a stranger that came into my life only through the artificial constructs of mechanistic philosophy, mechanistic physics. And so I chose to study quantum theory and did a PhD on hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory. Hidden variables because there was this assumption that somehow, if we know more, if we have more parameters like the hidden variables, we will have determinism. You know, indeterminism will not be irreducible, but it turns out it is irreducible. No matter what level you go to, uncertainty and indeterminism is a nature of a constantly dynamic system. And non-locality and non-separation, that no matter how far apart particles that have been interacted once, they're taken. What you do to one will impact the other. So here it is in physics, we have non-separation. And yet in the life sciences, which have been hijacked by the mechanistic paradigm, because that's where the profits lie. In fact, I was just seeing, you know, all the cars are driving up to Davos for the World Economic Forum. And they're already predicting that the biggest discussion there will be not agriculture, not food, but agri-tech. Continuing the tech extractivism, which is how the planet and its systems have been destroyed, now trying to extract the last bits of life in the soil, life in plants, farming systems, and I touch a bit on that. So my scientific training was about non-dualism, no excluded middle. And then my activist training with the Chipko movement, which has gained so much more importance in our times again, because there's an entire city that's on the way to one of the sacred sites, which are the pilgrims called the Char Dham. Now, these sacred sites are ancient sacred spots, which were then integrated into the larger national, I think in 1200, you know, nearly 1,000 years ago. And these little temples are where the rivers start, you know, where the glaciers melt and the rivers start, the 4 tributaries of the Ganges. And this particular town on the way to Badrinath, they call it sinking. I call it collapsing, because landslides are what I've witnessed. Landslides are what made the Chipko movement happen. Landslides are what created the disaster of 2013 in the Kedarnath Ghati. And landslides are what affected the home of the woman who rose first, Gaura Devi. Her village, Raini, is also collapsing. But the stories of the huts that are fracturing as the tunnels are built, you know, 30-mile, 40-mile tunnels in those very fragile Himalaya, which have no hard rock. And, you know, just because now with globalization, those heavy machineries, I call it the JCB culture, you know, if you can bulldoze the earth, that's your power today. And it's become a method of governance. So from Chipko, I also learned non-dualism. You know, I've grown up in the forests of the Himalaya, but the forests were forests, yeah, and the rivers were there. But it's not till the women responded through this beautiful act of becoming one with the forest, hugging the trees, and saying, we will not let the trees be cut. You will have to kill us before you kill the tree. To me, it's the ultimate oneness, because not only was an ecological understanding that the lives of the mountain people depend on stable forests, but it was also a oneness in activism. That if we are one with the forest and we are one with the mountains, then becoming one physically is the activism, which is both a resistance as well as a commitment to protect. And I think what has happened, a large part of environmental activism in the West has mimicked itself on the silo separation. First there was specialization, I'll just protect the wolf, I'll just protect the rhino, I'll just protect the elephant, I'll just protect the forest, I'll just protect the river. And now increasingly, the very concept of protecting the environment is being hijacked by the ultimate move of capitalism, which now comes as philanthrocapitalism. So if colonialism started with the papal bull, basically saying, go conquer the lands, finish up the barbarians, take the territories and make them ours. It went hand in hand with an epistemology and an ontology of separation. And the ontology of separation actually preceded Columbus by 10 years. The papal bull of Pope Innocent, which is basically, it talks about desiring with supreme ardor. It declared that heretical depravity be put far from the territories of the faithful. And who were the heretics? The women who knew the herbs, people who had diverse ways of thinking. And the Inquisitions and the witch hunts took 9 million lives, most of them women, over 250 years. And into this grew the epistemology of separation called mechanical philosophy. Bacon is the one who articulated it most, but it went hand in hand with epistemicide. It was an ecocide because it created and constructed a dead inert nature. But it was also based on epistemicide, the killing of any knowing of a living earth. That only ontological separation by the dominant, by the powerful was possible. And there's a brilliant person, who's taught us so much in India. He used to be Gandhi's secretary, and then he got married to someone in England. So he spent years looking through page after page after page of the India Office Library, which is where the British records were kept. And in these records were, productivity data from villages, record of shipbuilding, record of steel making. And the route was clear, Britisher comes here, finds out something excellent, presents it at the Royal Society, but before you know it is then presented as an invention in England. And its contemporary version is, of course, the biopiracy that I've had to work with. Because if, an ontology of separation is premised on an ontology of terra nullius, an empty, dead earth, merely raw material. And when that is expanded to living systems, it becomes bio-nullius. The seed is empty till a Monsanto puts a toxic gene. And then it becomes patentable property, an invention. And this is what I could see when all this started. And I was invited to a meeting in 1987, which is why I then started to save seeds and finally founded Navdanya. Initially, I just did the seed saving individually. But soon enough, it became clear that this biopiracy was actually happening. In 1994, the neem, a sacred tree of India, was patented. It took us 11 years of challenges in the European Patent Office. We eventually defeated the US government, which with W.R. Grace had a joint patent on the use of neem for pest control and fungicide. And then I come from Dehradun, and Dehradun is very famous for basmati. In 1994, a company called Rice Tech in Texas claims to have invented the basmati, the height of the plant, the length of the grain, and the aroma, And even a method, I think the 11th claim was methods of cooking rice. My grandmother had taught me how to cook rice when I was 6 years old. It's a simple thing that you can do. Syngenta tried to appropriate all of India's rice diversity. Our tribals had evolved 200,000 rices. The Green Revolution destroyed many. Fortunately, through Navdanya, we have saved 4,000 rice varieties. Among these, when we started to save seeds, we worked with the recognition that nature and our ancestors are not foolish. So if they brought this rice, it has value. Among the rices we had saved salt-tolerant rices, which helped the farmers bounce back after the 99 super cyclone in Orissa. And then in 2004, or was it 2014? I think it was 2004, the tsunami hit, and the Orissa farmers could donate 2 truckloads of salt-tolerant rice. Drought-prone millets, this is the year of millets. Millets had become forgotten foods. And there was a kind of racism of food. First, because they make a dark green. If you make a chapati or even a bread, they're brownish. And because there was racism of food, super milled rice, super refined flour, white sugar, white, all of this whiteness is, I think, what we have witnessed as such a big root cause of ill health and disease. So we said that we'll make the forgotten foods, future foods, and we would do celebration. Right now, today, while I'm with you, up in the mountains, women are celebrating a particular millet called Changora. And they have a festival dedicated to Changora, which over the years we've seen, it can tolerate a drought and it can tolerate a heavy flood. It is so resilient, but it has the richest mineral content of any food. We started to do festivals called Black is Beautiful. And then we would make all kinds of dishes with the darkness of the millets. 2023 is a year of millets. And I think it would be wonderful to celebrate the darkness, to celebrate the smallness, to celebrate the multiplicity, because the millets are called millets because the Latin million is 100,000. One tiny little seed gives you 100,000 seeds. And that's why this family of crops is called the millet. Monsanto patented an Indian wheat, ancient Indian wheat. Now, wheat itself does not give gluten allergy. It's the breeding for uniformity, both for chemical agriculture as well as for industrial processing, that causes the allergy. So the ancient Indian wheats were patented by Monsanto. And in this particular case, they dropped the patent as soon as we challenged it. There's even a patent of Conagra inventing atta. Atta is the word for flour in Hindi. Atta, flour, is basically flour. And the patent basically says it's an invention where you take wheat and put it through rollers and it comes out as cracked wheat, and then they take the cracked wheat and put it through rollers and becomes flour. And if this kind of inventiveness and innovation is what's being rewarded through patents, we've really reached the pits in rewarding theft, piracy, and actually ignorance. I won't continue, but Monsanto tried to have patents on climate resilience, and our patent law says plants, animals, and seeds are not inventable. I worked a lot with our parliament when the WTO was being implemented, basically so we can have exclusions. Let's put the exclusions that are reflected by our ethics of being one earth family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And our patent office basically said, A, you are not reproducing the seed, you've mainly added a trait, and the method you use to add a trait is actually well known. At the same time that the Indian Patent Office rejected the patent claim of Monsanto, at the same time, the Supreme Court of the United States rewarded Monsanto and a farmer had challenged, Monsanto had challenged a farmer who'd been saving seeds. There's no hybrid of soybean, so they could not make non-renewable seed, but they had all kinds of restrictions. This farmer used to go to the elevator and buy his seed. Monsanto said, he's growing our seeds. He said, I didn't buy it from you. He went court after court after court, and the Supreme Court rules and says, the seed is a self-replicating machine invented by Monsanto. And here, the ontology of separatism and separation that's being created is fascinating, because the creativity of nature, which is the power of reproduction, is being appropriated and extracted. And that is then being defined as an invention, even though no human being reproduces a plant. We modify, we pollute, but we do not reproduce. That is this autopoietic power of the plant and the seed itself. But the second thing that's being appropriated with it and extracted with it is the knowledge of the farmers who have bred these seeds. And till 3 years ago, Monsanto was trying to challenge this Article 3J of our patent law. And I have a whole book, which is available in the US as Reclaiming the Commons, with 35 years of these cases, the laws we created, challenges we faced. But Monsanto 3 years ago tried to challenge our law. And in the courts, they said, the seed is inactive, terra nullius, it's inert. It's only when we modify it, it has the power to act. And that's the level of extraction of life itself. And I have often called this as bioimperialism. So Bacon, called the father of modern science, promoted the idea of separation from nature and a human domination of nature. Because separation, in an integrated world, everyone is interrelated and everyone's equal but different. In a separated world, hierarchies are simultaneously created, that humans are separate from nature and some humans are superior to nature as well as other humans. And out of this is born capitalist patriarchy, the domination of women, racism, the domination through color, all the religious intolerance we are seeing everywhere, as well as the economic divide. In his book, Novum Organum, A New Instrument of Human Inquiry, Bacon said the inquiry will satisfy humanity's imperial ambitions over the natural world. That's what the object was. Bacon assumed that thinking mechanically in denial of our relationship to nature and nature's living processes will lead to infallible knowledge and total mastery over nature. And this is fascinating because nature's living processes are based on self-organization and interconnectedness and intelligent interconnectedness. To deny the self-organization and the life and to deny the relationship is basically the manufacture of ignorance. And yet the mechanical philosophy declares ignorance and falsehood infallible knowledge. And then it takes it further. What the witch hunts were a few centuries ago lead to contemporary witch hunts, where diversity of knowing is not just not tolerated, but if it comes in the way of capitalist extraction and making money, any system that says, oh, we can work with the seed and co-create, I can grow good food through agroecology. I can heal through plants and the healing power of the body. Witch hunts start. I mean, if you think just of the COVID time, look at the witch hunts against the epidemiologists who are the true experts in times of infections. And they're calling for more attention to natural immunity and pointing out that most people were dying of comorbidities. And you've all witnessed the witch hunts of our times. The new mechanical paradigm was based on power not gentle guidance over nature's course, as Bacon says, the power to conquer and subdue her, to shake her to her foundations. And this same separation also creates the epistemicide, where all indigenous knowledge is treated as superstition, as treated as ignorance. And this becomes particularly a very high cost because it leads to the denial of knowing beings, those who have the best knowledge of their ecosystems, best knowledge of their species. You know, when I left an academic institute in 1982 to create the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, then I said, if you want to see the impact of a mind, the first place to go is those who are impacted by the mind. They have the knowledge. You want to see the impact of a dam, go to those whose villages are being displaced by the dam. You want to see what Bhopal did, go talk to the women who are still on a hunger strike now, 38 years after the disaster. So I started to do participatory work and participatory research. And the participatory research, of course, you know, went beyond the objectification of human beings as well as nature, but it also transformed knowledge into a partnership. Epistemic democracy is the only way you can do participatory action research. So we are at this moment, you know, while we are discussing the book, the excellent book, Beyond Separation, we're also talking at the same time that going beyond separation is not only recognizing the unity that is in every spiritual tradition, in every indigenous culture, in all independent sciences, independent of the power of extraction. I just noticed the science minister of England is a venture capitalist who used to promote biotech industry. Now, if you make a biotech investor the minister of science, of course, he'll keep talking about his profits as the new science. And there's such huge, listen to the science, they say. But I'm not going to listen to a moneymaker as the voice of knowledge. And I will not allow the voices of true knowing in a non-separated world as not knowing, as criminal, as needing to be hunted out as witches. We are at a moment where the future of humanity depends on transcending anthropocentrism. And the good thing is that all real independent science, outside the control of the poison cartel, the Bayers and the Monsantos, the Syngentas and the ChemChinas, the Bayer, DuPont, who are now another fancy, Corteva, beyond their world, true science is finding not just interconnectedness everywhere, it is finding amazing intelligence, you know, new research on bacterial intelligence, new research, of course, on animal intelligence, new research on the soil food web as the World Wide Web, and so more neuron activity going on in one root of one plant than in the human brain. And shedding anthropocentrism then becomes vital. But for this, we have to shed the control of philanthrocapitalism. Why do I say today's Columbuses are the philanthrocapitalists? Because at that time, you know, Columbus was set out to, and then the mission became civilizing the barbarian, including exterminate them. 90% in the Americas were exterminated. But today's civilizing mission is using tools of extraction as civilizing missions and the new religion. But these tools of extraction are also tools of property creation. You know, all GMOs are linked to patents. That's why I started to work on seeds. The gene editing technologies, all linked to patenting. Mr. Gates has a company called Editas for patents from gene editing. And the related inequalities that it creates is because a technology that justifies extraction and also justifies separation and inertness in living systems becomes vital for giving immunity to extractivism, but rewarding it also. Rewarding it with making them look like they are the ones who create value. Nature's value creation disappears. Indigenous people's value creation disappears. Women's value creation disappears. So my book, Philanthrocapitalism, is really an edited book of all the movements that have worked on different facets of Mr. Gates' doing. And each movement has written its chapter. The people who are looking at health, how the health program has been taken over. The biggest doctor is Mr. Gates. How agriculture I've worked on, there's a Gates Ag one ag, agriculture is so diversified. Every field is different. Every farmer's farm is different. Every region is different. The plants are different. The foods are different. He wants one agriculture for the world. One agriculture. Gates Ag 1 is his program. And how do they promote themselves as the new missionaries? And what's this thing called agri-tech? Agri-tech is bringing the tools that are under their control to then control food and farming. And they have their dream, this dystopia of farming without farmers, food without farms. And the Mr. Bayers and the Monsantos are getting ready to produce food, not as food that you eat. You can go to my garden and eat a carrot. I can go to my mustard field and take the leaves and make a saag, a sarson ka saag. But they are preparing for reducing food to raw material for food to be made in labs, just like fertilizers were made in factories. And then seeds went from the farm into labs to be genetically engineered. Now they're trying to do that to food. And that's what the World Economic Forum billionaires are meeting to see. For this, they have to have digital surveillance. They, of course, have to have ownership over the seed and planting material. They have to have new fears of all kinds. I remember when I went to Hawaii to launch the anti-GMO movement. And because I had said, let's start a garden of hope, just that day, the schools issued a notice that if children have to go to gardens, they must be dressed in moon suits because those soil organisms are so dangerous. They're bacteria, and bacteria kill us. And this military approach to the diversity of life, to instead of recognizing that entanglement is our being, we are interbeings, it's now assaulting a war against the virome and the biome. And that's an unwillable war. Even the war against the insect was not won. Weeds, super weeds is what has taken over in the Roundup Ready fields. And it's a call for humility. It's a call for recognizing limits. And to me, spirituality and the sacred is, this mountain is inviolable. This river is inviolable. This plant cannot be violated. And the sacred then becomes both our relationship with sentient beings and non-sentient beings, and it becomes our consciousness to protect and resist that which destroys. I have always seen ecological activism as a sacred duty, as a dharma. Increasingly, food that we have taken so much for granted will be the place where we have to, every time we eat through dharma. And moving backwards from what we eat to how was it grown? What is the seed? How is the farmer? What's the farming community? Today, food is the new instrument of conquest. And Kissinger, during Vietnam War and the Green Revolution, he had said, food is a weapon. And at one level, that's exactly what's happening today, except that now, earlier it was more through US foreign policy and their corporations. Now it's the billionaires and the philanthrocapitalists, basically so greedy that they want the food every morsel of food from every being and every human being. And I see the distillation of all aspects of the spiritual and ecological struggles now focusing on food, to keep it sacred, to keep it as a prasad, to realize that food is where life begins and life is maintained. And as in India, it is said, Annam Brahman, food is the creator, because food is the movement of life through the web of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. You want to say it one more time? Annam Brahman.
Annam Brahman.
Annam Brahman. Thank you. And I think Lynn is going to introduce Dr. Marya, and then we'll converge.
Yeah, so I have the honor to introduce a long-term dear friend and ally, and one to be in cahoots with. And I feel like Dr. Shiva also did a wonderful introduction for some of the most recent work that Rupa has done. But let me do the more, I want to offer her bio here as a way of honoring the work and the many communities that Rupa has long been a part of, and that I've watched her be on the front lines of for decades. So Dr. Rupa Marya is an associate professor of medicine at the University of California of San Francisco, where she practices and teaches internal medicine. She's the co-founder of the Do No Harm Coalition, a collective of healthcare workers committed to changing social structures that impede health and well-being for different groups of people. She's the founder and executive director of the Deep Medicine Circle, a worker-directed nonprofit committed to healing the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, story, learning, and restoration. She works with her husband, the lovely agroecological farmer, Benjamin Farher, and the Association of the Ramaytush Ohlone in their ancestral territory, where she is part of Farming is Medicine project, where farmers are recast as ecological stewards of rematriated land, and food is liberated from the market economy. In 2021, she published her first book with a political ecologist and food system activist and policy professor, Raj Patel. And the book is amazing, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. And the book really advances a new level of diagnosis that incorporates historical and looking at lines of power in our understanding of the root causes of health disparities and the rise of the inflammatory diseases in industrial places. And it offers a compelling treatment options for what is ailing our peoples and our planet. She also happens to be an incredible and gifted guitarist, singer, and composer, and her band Rupa and the April Fishes is an incredible fusion of styles and polyglots, multiple languages and multiple ways of being with music. And it explores many of the themes that does her scholarship and her activism. She lives with her husband and her two sons in Ohlone territory in the Bay Area, and has also been part of another effort of a clinic to decolonize food and medicine and was invited to do some of that work with some of the elders at Standing Rock. So she's a trusted ally by many. And what I can also say from knowing Rupa for many years is that these days we talk about the front lines, but Rupa has tirelessly lived, gone to pedaled bicycles, done concerts, been engaged in what the so-called front lines are. And her heart, her voice, her life force, everything has been dedicated to the work that she offers. And so it's an honor to be here with a beloved sister and ally, and listen to how Rupa wants to speak to this ontology of separation in this moment of perhaps it's looking at medicine, or even anything you want to say about calling philanthropy and wealth holders, calling them forward in these times of how to support what we talk about in the book of transition pathways. But I feel like that's what you live and what a lot of your scholarship, your care is dedicated to. So welcome, Rupa.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Alnoor. And part of the challenge of not sending you the bio was some of those things are outdated. But I'm grateful to be actually speaking to you here from occupied, unceded Ohlone territory in the region that used to be occupied by the Yelamu tribelet here. I'm sitting on the top of the buildings at the University of California, San Francisco, where I'm a professor of medicine. Just had more COVID patients admitted. Have a elderly Punjabi farmer in the hospital right now who is suffering the impacts from long-standing exposure to the kinds of chemicals that have destroyed some of the richest soils in the world in the Punjab region. So tying back, to what Vandana was saying, and it was so good to see you and hear you. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for hosting this gathering. So when I think about the ontology of separation, Raj and I wrote a lot about what we call the colonial capitalist mindset, which kind of fuses both this error of thought that human beings are somehow separate from the web of life or separate from each other, that we don't depend deeply upon that. And then the extractive, exploitive economic system of capitalism. So there have been waves of colonization throughout human history. Food has been weaponized for thousands of years, for as long as humans have been alive. There have been waves of conquest. However, there has never been such a damaging wave as the last several hundred years of colonial capitalism. Because in that mindset of separation with domination and extraction, there has been wholehearted fracturing of systems and ways of knowing that have kept humans healthy for thousands and thousands of years. And what that has led to in that fracturing of separation of people from each other, from people from the land, from people from the living systems that keep us well, the internal and external relationships we have with others, be they microbes or other beings. The outcome of that is inflammation of our bodies, inflammation of our societies, and inflammation of the planet herself. And when we say inflammation, we're not just talking about a metaphor. It's a powerful metaphor when we look at the world on fire. But it's a literal process by where the systems of the immune system in our body, so even when we say the immune system, we're following an ontology of separation in medicine, which was, the field of modern Western medicine was developed at the same time that the world was being colonized in this latest great wave of colonial capitalist mindset. But like the immune system is not somehow separate from the other systems in our body, but that's the way we discuss them. Our body has a way of harmonizing with the environment around us. And the cells within our body don't just go around, policing the borders of our nationhood of self to keep foreign out and to keep self in. Again, that's another very colonial perspective and metaphor that was advanced when I learned about immunology. But in fact, our immune system is there to harmonize us with the world around us and the set of exposures around us. So if those exposures, and the sum of our lifetime exposures is called the exposome. If the exposome is something that is based in systems of care, where people are caring for one another, people are caring for the earth, people are involved in politics and economies of care. As we see in intact cultures, for example, the Waorani people who are living in Ecuador and the Amazon, those folks, I spoke with Namonti Nkemo, who is part of that community. COVID went through their community, about 2,500 people 3 times. Everyone got sick with the same syndrome. Several people tested positive. Not one person died. And I find that really fascinating because you think, okay, these people are unvaccinated, they're unexposed. We've seen what happens to unvaccinated people, but none of those people died. The Waorani people who did die were people who were living in the villages that were set up by the petroleum companies and living in community with those those people and with the ways of life and values of those people. And so what is it about, the exposome when it is based in care, that we honor the other as ourselves, that we see the other's presence as, and support that presence, not only in support of that person, but we recognize that that care comes back to us. And so that the people who are living in those ways have almost zero presence of chronic inflammatory disease. And the chronic inflammatory disease I'm talking about are things that I'm as a hospital medicine doctor here, it's the bulk of what I see. It's cancer, it's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, it's now the leading cause of end-stage liver disease or cirrhosis is a inflammatory liver process that's set off by things like, even microdoses of glyphosate over a period of time accumulate and are causing this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's causing kidney problems, kidney failure. It's causing severe COVID, predisposing us to severe COVID. So when we're talking about like who's getting sick from COVID, is people who have this burden of chronic inflammation in their bodies. And so the exposome of colonial capitalist societies arranged by colonial capitalism are highly inflammatory. They involve everything that Vandana was just talking about, from land theft to labor exploitation to, ongoing trauma in how communities are impacted and separated and exploited. And so when we look at chronic inflammatory disease, when you study medicine, you won't learn about how the exposome of colonial capitalism will predispose you to chronic inflammatory disease. And that, in fact, the exposome is more predictive of whether or not you're going to develop chronic inflammatory disease, whether or not you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke, than your own genome. But modern medicine will teach medical students ad nauseum about the genome and genetic engineering and increasingly precision-oriented, individualized healthcare approaches, as opposed to zooming out and looking at, okay, what does the science say about why we're actually getting sick? And that belies a investment in a way of thinking that will leave invisible at all times the powers and structures that are predetermining who's going to get sick and how. And once we start to realize that, we start to see that actually, patriarchy and racism are forms of biological warfare. They are not only, dictated by, how people get care once they get into the system, but all the structures around all the structures around our bodies in our society, which means like access to clean food, healthy food, access to clean air, access to soil that's alive and vibrant, access to forests and greenery. These things, access to shelter right now, as I'm watching the rain come down in San Francisco and knowing that, over 6,000 to 8,000 people are still sitting outside, that we have allowed people to be left outside. That causes damage not only in obviously those people, but in ourselves. When we deny the reality of our interconnectedness and we deny our care. And so it becomes an urgency to address not only the immediate needs of our most vulnerable, communities made most vulnerable by colonial capitalism, but also ourselves, those who have privilege, in how this ontology of separation is damaging for us, because we have networks of connection within us and around us that dictate the necessity of care. I'm going to share a couple instances that happened to me recently that sort of expose these dynamics and how they're reflected in individuals, but emblematic of whole systems and structures. So I was invited to give a talk at the Rodale Institute for Organic Agriculture, or Regenerative Agriculture. So they study regenerative agriculture. They do a lot of great science looking at the soil, and I'm going to put chemicals here, and I'm not going to put chemicals here, and what happens to the soil, what happens to the crops. And so they're doing a lot of that stuff, and they're hailed as leaders in regenerative movements. And this story will sort of show you how deeply problematic the mindset is of even the people in these regenerative agricultural systems. And so I gave a talk about colonialism and the health impacts of colonization, not just on our bodies, but on our planets, on our soils. The same inflammation that I'm talking about in our bodies is also present in our soils, not just, again, metaphorically, but our soils are literally inflamed when they are left uncovered, when they are tilled with the industrial farming practices that we see around the world post-Green Revolution. As I gave this talk about our need to reestablish kinship between people and each other, between people and the web of life, which means everything from the soil to the water to the invisible beings that grant us their health, and grant us health through their very presence and activity. After the talk, one of the people in senior leadership at Rodale, who was there at the White House Conference of Food and Nutrition and all that stuff, went up to someone, I don't think he knew that was one of our friends, and said to our friend, "Why is she going on and on about colonialism? Men will always murder other men and rape their women." And to me, when that sentence came back to me, I was like, okay, this statement belies the whole root of the problem. This person can imagine a world without violence towards soil, but cannot imagine a world without violence towards women. Doesn't understand that those things are actually the exact same thing. That if we can violate children and women, we can violate everything. We can disregard the sacredness of everything. And so that is when you see these, philanthrocapitalists starting to get involved in regenerative agriculture, they're not working from a mindset of going to the root cause of the problem, which is, again, an ontology that leaves us inflamed, that leaves the window open for the abuse and, missing and murdered Indigenous women. Those women and those people who are involved in caring for the earth in the most concrete ways around the earth through agroecological practices, through tending the forests, not seeing that those things are completely inextricable, totally entangled. The next situation I'll describe happened here at UCSF in medicine. So in 2020, I was asked to help draft a letter on anti-racism at UCSF, demands of the institution in the wake of George Floyd. We need to push for some advancements in against racism within our own institution. And so one of the things that came to my attention at that time from an incredible dermatologist, Jenna Lester, who formed the Skin of Care Clinic here. She at that time was the only Black dermatologist at UCSF. And she shared with me the presence of a 90-year-old professor, Howard Maybach, who was still there at UCSF, still coming to the dermatology monthly meetings, and who was involved in his early career as a medical student with William Epstein and Albert Kligman in Pennsylvania, in prison experiments at the Holmesburg prison in Pennsylvania, documented in a book called Acres of Skin, which is a horror story. I don't recommend it, but if you want to look more deeply into this. And in this prison, when Kligman saw all the Black people there who were imprisoned, he said it was like seeing acres of skin. He got so excited that there were all this skin to experiment upon. They were receiving support from entities like Dow Chemicals and other agricultural chemical businesses to expose people's skin to these chemicals in order to determine what the toxicity was. And so this is how retin-A was discovered, something that has made lots and lots of money for Kligman and now the university, but none for the people who were experimented upon. Howard Maybach then went on to UCSF, and so did Bill Epstein, who became the chair of dermatology, to start doing these experiments here in California on upwards, I think, of 2,600 patients who are incarcerated people in the California Medical Facility and at San Quentin. So when we were making our demands, we asked that Howard Maybach is forced to step down. He should not be a part of our university community. He engaged in what we called Nazi experiments. These were experiments very similar to the ones that Nazi doctors performed on Jewish people in the concentration camps to determine the acceptability of exposure to certain kinds of pesticides. And so when we did make this demand, the university basically said nothing. Howard continued to show up at, dermatology Zoom meetings now. It was COVID, sometimes in his bathrobe, much to the chagrin of the female dermatologist and the Black dermatologist. And so we asked that this person no longer be part of our community so that he couldn't expose us to his harm, and that the university make a clear denouncement of this practice. And they didn't. So just 2 weeks ago, the university came out and issued an apology, remorse. We're remorseful. Now we're engaging in this historic process. So what did they do over the last 2 years is they engaged some historians to evaluate the 7,000 documents and to look at, what Howard Maybach did, and to say we're remorseful, and to say we're involved in a restorative justice process that involves the oral histories of, the people who were affected or, whatever. To me, this is a great example of the ontology of separation. So how did 3 Jewish doctors, people who are very active in their own Jewish communities, just 20 years after the Nuremberg codes were established, that pronounced the, evaluated and decided on the importance of informed consent for people who were undergoing medical experimentation, that they looked at what happened with the doctors' trials of the Nazi doctors and denounced what happened, that these doctors should then go on and recreate the same kinds of experiments on Black and brown people in the United States. So how, and then why and medical science will take that information, and there's no actual process of meaningful consequence. And so this is something that for me is really critical as we think of transitioning society. What are the meaningful consequences when someone engages in this kind of violence towards other people, towards the earth, towards other beings? What are the meaningful consequences of that? Is this something where we just engage in oral histories and tell stories about it? Is this something where we remove people from power? Is this something where we collectively denounce and relegate that person into the halls of shame, the ways that we can say this is not how we want to move forward as a society? So these spaces of reckoning are really critical, and tell us a lot about what we're prepared to do and what we're not prepared to do. And what I realized that we're not prepared to do is to really reckon with power in these institutions. And that goes for philanthrocapitalism, that goes for the food system, that goes for medicine. And that is a real problem. And so how do we erode the power structures if we want to advance a culture of care, a care revolution? What are the ways in which we stop participating and hold power's feet to the fire, flatten hierarchies so that we can have meaningful consequences and meaningful change? I was invited to speak at COP27 about the work that I'm doing with the Deep Medicine Circle. So this is an organization that we formed in 2020 to answer some of these questions about how do we reestablish kinship between people and between people and the planet in the web of life. And our organization is a place where Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are working together to heal the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, story, restoration, and learning. We are working with several different California Native people here in Ohlone territory on a 38-acre farm and on a 1-acre rooftop farm. And we're advancing a program called Farming as Medicine that has been generously supported by philanthropy. Some of the people who I can see are on this call. And so in that work, we do 4 things. So the first part is land back. And so what is land back? And part of our work is establishing a land back learning lab with Tiffany Adams, an amazing California native artist who's coming on board to do that work with us. So land back isn't simply just a real estate transaction. It isn't simply just, let's look at identity politics. It is about deeply the abolition of private property. So if we want to escape, the sleight of hands of these, seed pirates, we abolish private property. We recommon. So we are exploring what it means to recommon on land, what it means for land to be sacred unto herself, what it means to give space and support to indigenous communities to have access to their ancestral homelands and to have ownership of spaces where they can be in relationship and have the things they need to practice their ceremonies that make land sacred, that make the earth sacred, that make the water sacred. It is a space to for non-native, for diasporic people who've also been orphaned from the earth, to be in relationship to that. When you see the practice of people engaged in their rituals to make land sacred and water sacred, you start walking differently on the land. You start acting like you don't own it, that it's not yours, that you are a guest in those places. And that's something my friend Karina Gould really talks beautifully about and talked about in our book. That place of re-understanding ourselves and orienting ourselves as a guest is really critical. Land back is about the resacralization of land and our relationship to it. It is necessarily ceding power to communities who know how to guide this process. And it is also about insisting upon the abolition of those mindsets that are deeply infecting our indigenous communities as well here, because people have been so colonized. So the toxic masculinity, the anti-Black racism, those aspects cannot move forward if we're going to reestablish kinship with each other and with the land. The second part of our work is to reframe farmers as stewards of health, not only in growing nutrient-dense food through the practice of agroecology, what we call more organic farming, but also through their care of the soil and the water, through doing practices that reinvigorate that soil food web. When you look at the water running in California right now through the Central Valley, that soil has no chance in staying still, because there's no fungal elements in those soils, no healthy ones that secrete the glomalin that glue the soil together. That soil has been so abused. So reframe farmers as stewards of health. Decommodify food. So our farmers don't sell our food. We give it all away 100%. We're undergoing organic certification right now. All of our food goes to area community groups that have been doing mutual aid for years to get the food directly out to communities who need it. So we are growing a variety of culturally relevant foods. We've been asking community members, and we're serving all sorts of different communities. This is the Bay Area. So we have Native American communities from all over. We have, Black and brown communities. We have poor white communities. We have people of different food cultures. So we're growing foods that they're asking for. And then we're growing foods that they might not know about, that we are teaching and sharing different food cultures interculturally. But all that food is decommodified. So if the colonial capitalist cosmology has damaged the earth, how do we advance cosmologies of care? And that is to remove food from the commodity system and to reassert its value as a relative, to reassert its place as a relative. And that leads to the fourth part of food, farming as medicine, which is that food is medicine. So once food has been liberated from the market mentality, it can re-enter its sacred relationality with us as medicine. And so it's been beautiful, that part, to learn of other people's foods, to explore my own ancestral foods. We have had a beautiful farmer working with us, Zainab Hussein from Kula Nursery. She is from South Asia and has a nursery in West Oakland where she's growing all of these plants from South Asia. And when I walked in there the other day, she's been helping on our rooftop farm. I was just so moved by seeing all of these plants, the henna, the karipata, the jasmine, all these plants from my childhood in Dehradun that I had seen were now growing in Oakland. And it was like being surrounded by family. It was beautiful. And so that is part of that exciting work that we're doing. And it literally requires retooling our minds, retooling our relationships, and also creating structures where the ontology of separation cannot thrive. That when it starts to express itself, as it will, as we all must shed this colonial mindset, that we have structures in place where it can't continue, it can't thrive. And so that's part of our work, is learning how to build those structures. So as I sit here in the hospital, I think about the disposable beings, the immigrants, the indigenous people, the wildlife, the forest, the water, the elderly. You look at everyone who's dying. We've all thrown away our masks. We're back in parties. The emergency room is full right now. The emergency room is full because people have not, understood the science. And haven't understood the science because the science is being dictated by capitalism, by economic interests. I can see a world where we advance a culture of care, and it will require great sacrifice and pivoting from all of us. It will require us creating systems that have been missing for many, many centuries. But it's totally possible. We just need the philanthropists and the philanthrocapitalists to fork over all their money.
Thank you so much. That was a yeah, I often sit with how the monies keep flowing, and how not flooding, but flowing, and then let it sink and fill the aquifers, and thank you for ending there. And I want to thank both you, Rupa, and Dr. Shiva, for, I want to say, really showing us that even in ontologies of separation, in your analysis and your rigor and what you've dedicated your life to, even when people are trying to isolate and control, but you're showing the interconnectedness even of the ontology, and then the seed production. It is itself showing the interconnectedness of the thought form, of the mechanistic way of being. And in that way, then the way that you both have dedicated your life and your work to actually showing what Alnoor and I talk about in the book is kind of just transition plus an ontological shift, a just transition plus this corresponding shift of the very way that we see reality, of the very way that, as Dr. Shiva was talking about, epistemological, ecocide, this very way of understanding other forms of knowledge. And you both really showed that in both of the pieces of what you did. And then the third piece I just want to reflect is that with what you spoke to, Alnoor and I often get asked, so what are these transition pathways? And what do you mean by this 5-element mandala? And you both just so clearly showed what it is to live these examples of care, of living what is solidarity, not as an assertion, but as an active praxis, and the work that's required for all of us to heal and decolonize and to heal ourselves from systems of modernity and commodifications. So that's just my heartfelt thanks. And then Alnoor, maybe you want to start with asking some questions. And then the last thing, I don't know if we said in the introduction, which is just this heart full of thanks, that Dr. Shiva wrote the foreword for our book. And I don't know if we even said that in the beginning, but I didn't want us to continue down to just and just gratitude to be on this journey of sitting with these questions and still living and doing something. Don't let the questions become our stagnation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Rupa, and for all the work you're doing, and yeah, the way you walk in the world with integrity and solidarity. My instinct is what's going to come up is people are going to say, so what do I do? Right? And this is also part of the colonized mind and the desire to go into solutionism. And what we're finding in the inquiry around what we call onto shifts, moving from ontologies of separation and dominance to ontologies of relationality and liberation, and ontologies of animism, to be in relationship with a living planet and a living cosmos again, is that there's no key switch. It's not a turn. There's a practice, that the very manner by which we approach and which we gaze the world as separate, as inanimate, as manipulable, as is from a lens of entitlement. And so the first question I have to both of you is, how do we avoid the solutionism? I have a teacher who, whenever you ask a how question, his answer is always, what are you doing now? That's the answer, right? On one level. And yet there's something more that's being asked of us. And as elders in the space, as pioneers in the space, I guess it's not a how question, but maybe a praxis question on shifting ontologies from the colonialist capitalist present, what we've been socialized and then trained into something else, which our deep time ancestors know. And we may know on a somatic level, and how do we move forward with that? And maybe Dr. Shiva, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so, colonialism was based on one declaring the earth dead, other people inferior, to be colonized, not needing to be civilized, and the earth's resources as private property to be extracted. And for this, they needed the ontology of separation and the epistemology of what in our language we call mechanistic reductionism, but is an epistemology of separation. But it's continued constantly by pushing other presence into the past and the solutionism of the dominant into the future, so that it's through this chrono-colonization, colonizing by redefining time, it makes the conquest through solutionism an inevitability. Earlier it was for progress, and now that extinction becomes and collapse becomes the dominant metaphor, now destroying the world faster becomes saving the world. And that's what philanthrocapitalism is about, taking the narrative and controlling it. So how do we avoid solutionism? Is by re-embedding ourselves in our minds, in the diversity of intelligences, our actions and our technologies, in non-violent, do no harm action. And then if the non-violence becomes the measure, then organic is the way to go, not chemical, not genetic engineering, and your measure set. But the third really important is what both Rupa and I shared. It's recognizing of us being part of one earth family and all beings being our relatives. And then instead of seeing solutions to problems, we start seeing removing the harm, bringing the harmony, and out of that harmony, encouraging and facilitating the healing.
Yeah, I would say thank you for that. I would say, agree and say that for me, I see the how as if the ontology of separation is our issue, insisting upon the connection, the reconnection, and then understanding solutions. There are solutions, and they're not going to come from us. They're going to come from those who have been most crushed by colonial capitalism. So here in California, so-called California, it's going to come from our California Native communities. It's going to come from the people who are most engaged in that sacred work. When I think of people like Chief Colleen of the Winnemem Wintu and the work she's been doing with the Run for Salmon, right? It's understanding that the solutions will come from the ground up. It's building radical solidarity. Insisting upon connection. It sounds really simple. What does that mean? So those of us here who are sitting in San Francisco or the Bay Area right now, there are thousands of people who are being impacted by these storms. And I'm going to keep coming back to it because it's shocking to me. So if you have a safe place that's warm, you have some funds, help get those people inside. If you feel like it's not the job of private people to do it, if it's the job of public people, use your connections, use your money, use your power to go and knock down those mayors' doors. Mayor Breed is horrific in what she's done with COVID, with wildfires, and now with floods. So insist upon the connection. Look around you and see who's been discarded, Who has been discarded? Who is counted as disposable human beings? Chronically ill people, immunosuppressed people, elderly people, unhoused people, indigenous people. Spend time with those folks and ask them, what are the solutions? What's needed? They have the solutions. It's going to come from there. The real culture of care, the revolution of care, practice mutual aid every day if you have privilege. So these are concrete things that, it's not so esoteric. It's not like when we're using words like ontology and epistemology, it's like, yes, and there's someone on the sidewalk right now. This is real, concrete, material realities. We are obligated to care. That feeling that you have, that gnawing feeling, let it gnaw more, harder, faster, until it pushes you into radical solidarity. You don't know best what's to do for these communities, but they will teach you. Attend People School. That's coming up online. Tiny, Poor Magazine, the last weekend of January, online People School. You can set up there and register. Go to poormagazine.org and learn about poor people-led solution to the crises of poverty. That's a great example of the how. And so those are ways that that I'm still learning, and that I'm, it's a constant challenge. It's a constant learning and unlearning how to mobilize privilege. And, in India, what's happening to Dalit people, to Muslim people, to indigenous people under Modi's fascism. These are things where we have to mobilize our radical solidarity every day. We have to build that.
Thank you, Rupa. Lynn, do you want to ask a question? And maybe we open it up to the group after that.
I feel like I want to ask a question that may build on what you just both offered. And Dr. Shiva, you did a wonderful job in the beginning of really showing us the historical roots of how we got into this dualistic ontology of separation and extraction, and the hubris to that we can control life seeds, all of it. And Rupa, your book does a really good job as well of expanding the notion of what diagnosis is, to really look at upstream and how we see the interconnections. Alnoor and I attempted to do that around this enterprise called Philanthropy, and see it going upstream, because it so much influences and indeed sometimes controls the NGOs, the social movements, even when it does try to listen, even when it does try to go to the communities that you're speaking to and tries to do no harm, there's something still deeper in it that seems to co-opt. And so I'm wondering, under the principles of kind of do no harm, what would you say to both traditional philanthropy and also those that are trying to embrace this just transition moment and are trying to do the work of decolonizing philanthropy? Like, not just where do you start, but just anything that comes about caution and wisdom, and really what is it to live and practice what you're speaking of solidarity. And that can be on anything from how funds go to how you organize endowments, to anything. Just wanted to ask it very specifically to the philanthropic sector itself.
I can answer just from my experience in the last year and a half of starting this organization, raising a bunch of money to pay farmers really well. So we pay our farmers, we're aiming for area median income. Right now we're about 1.7% or 1.7 times the amount a regular farmer makes in the area where we're living. But that's still not the area median income when you look at everyone who has been impacted most severely by COVID on the areas that we are, like the San Mateo County, in the farming community. In those communities, it's the farm workers, right? So how do we create that architecture of justice within how we operate? It's quite simply the philanthropists who are now my favorite, who have been the most effective, are the ones that just hand over the money. And they're not asking me to write a damn report that's like pages long, because they just know that they see the proof. We grew and gave away over 33,000 pounds of organic food, that we are supporting the jobs and the movement of land and resources and food for people. So changing systems of accounting and accountability, of course, like, you want to be making sure that things are going well, but can you loosen the control on that? That's part of it. And then also finding values alignment with groups. So I've been really interested in finding values alignment with people who have access to lots of resources, and who want to see things move in a better way. And so how do you, create communities of care where that funding can then be shared? So it's not just going to one organization or 5 organizations, but it's going to a network of groups that can start to shift a regional structure. So our farming is medicine work, I'll just say, we're creating a toolkit, a policy toolkit, so that this model of farmers being involved in healing the earth and taking care of people is something that's just becomes like what we can do. We believe that, cities pay for lights to be on, cities can pay for everyone to have access to healthy food through supporting farmers that are doing this in a local agroecological regional way. And so how can we start creating networks that shift core structures like food, medicine, housing, these kinds of economies that everyone requires access to for wellness? How do we start to create alternative economic structures of care?
I was asked to do a book during the COVID lockdown by the Italians, and they said, please write on the economy of care. So of course I wrote on the economy of extractivism, which is not an economy. It is theft, it is money making. It has nothing to do with the oikos. It has nothing to do with life. And I realized that, what is care? Care is the giving of unconditional love. When I care for the soil, I just give my love and care to the soil. Well, a mother, care for the baby. And the gift economy then becomes the best way to create living economies. And if philanthropy has to fit into that gift economy, then definitely not the way Mr. Gates does it. His money is tiny bits to do 2 things: privatize the public system, whether it's health or education, or the seeds of the world, which he's doing just now. But the second is worse: create new enclosures, identify. Yeah, here's a bit of money that I can give, pretending I'm giving, but through this little hook, I take it all. And that's why philanthrocapitalism is philanthrocapitalism. True giving is definitely based on gratitude that, I have this wealth, and more often than not, it's the children of those who got the wealth who have the consciousness to say, I want to use it, not to make more money. I want to use it to not do harm, to correct the harm, and to create new possibilities. So I would say 3 qualities are there. First, it has to be gift. And that's why the philanthropic sector has gone crazy, because it's being run now by the same KPMGs and the same audit funds, that have been caught again and again and again, fudging. What Accenture used to be, what was its earlier name? And they're the ones who were Enrons.
Arthur Anderson, yeah.
They were Arthur Anderson, and they had totally fudged the Enron accounts. And I remember the Enron chief coming to India wanting to create a whole, an energy system and take over. And she rode an elephant, to impress. And she said, Enron would be here till the last bit of energy, last drop of water is privatized. That is not philanthropy. That is just crude colonialism, crude capitalism, working with the philanthropic gown. So first is the gift, that if you know what needs to be done and you are not in a position to do it, find the people who do. And then the second, after the gift, is trust. You've got to trust them. And that's why Rupa's so right. You know, I've watched wonderful groups that supported work in the third world. You know, they'd raise a little bit of money and then they'd physically travel and to be with the communities and see for themselves. And, you know, and that it was a solidarity. And it moved out of radical solidarity, too much money to be then governed by the KPMGs. And now they have to hire about 30 people to do remote bookkeeping. And they have no idea what's happening on the ground. They never will. So trust and solidarity with its solidarity. And the third is gratitude. You know, respect and gratitude, be grateful, you know, don't be arrogant. And I actually am, you know, I've just seen in the last 5 years, this nonsensical word come out called impact. You know, if all your specialize is in doing harm, and then you want to pretend that somehow through impact, you are going to do the good, and you will be in charge of what impact is, you'll get it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, I want to open it up to the broader community. I don't know, Lynn, you want to say something before we do that?
I just wanted to reflect on what Dr. Shiva just ended with, of the impact, and it reminded me of where you were speaking of the how to say it, the mechanization and the hubris of controlling the seed, that feels like the same ontology is there when we speak of impact, when we speak of measurement, when we isolate and say, this is the way to do schooling, this is the way to do education, this is the way to do healthcare, whatever it is. But I just wanted to draw that point of what you were just speaking of, that I felt like you began with, in terms of the hubris to say that we can control life itself, and that, yeah, there's something in there that I just find very powerful to what you're pointing towards. And with our time, we have about, well, before we even open it up to others, I wanted to see if either of you have a question for one another, and then we can ask all those who've been wonderful, like giving up the gift of listening during this time.
Oh, I just know when I can come to Dehradun, that's all.
Yeah, and it's wonderful.
Have some chai.
I began with the quantum, and then the seed taught me relatedness, and including the relatedness between the health of the planet and the soil and people. And, you know, I've come through that route, and Rupa through health, you know, has come to the soil route. And when I said, you know, we will all at the end of it realize, and I think it'd be wonderful if the land back movement, which has been originated by the indigenous people, but could be the movement for the people who've been made homeless and are suffering in the rain today. Because, you know, when slavery ended, I think, what was it? 40 acres and a mule. You know, wasn't that? The slave could get 40 acres and a mule and then find their life somewhere. And I think, and now, of course, if it is beyond private ownership, then what we need to do, you know, when young people ask me, I said, you know, everyone panics because land has got too costly, land is real estate. But if 100 of you join hands and collectively take a place on this earth and find a way to give your life in service of the earth, it's totally possible. And I think public funds should be going there to bringing people back to the land. And that's why we do the annual course in September for 1 month. It's called Return to Earth, on the living seed and the living soil and living food and living economies that grow from all this.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think what's challenging here in this place is if we were to do 40 acres in a mule, or 100 people go onto land, it's someone else's land that's been stolen. And so we have these histories of erasure of communities here in California, in this land, where the ways of knowing and being that made land sacred in these places is held in the bodies and minds, imaginations, dreams, DNA of specific peoples. And so how do we, I actually think that land back is, I mean, that's why Tiny talks about land back in Poor Magazine and the work of homefulness. And she has lots of love and blessings and support and works in solidarity with Lishan, Chairwoman Karina Gould, and others of the Ohlone community. And I think that land back for me, as I've been thinking about it a lot this last year, because running into challenges of Chief Colleen asked me, like, why land back? Why would you do that? In this homeland, Ramatish homeland, there's only 4 remaining family lines of people. Some of those people are not in integrity. So why, what does it mean to work in land back in a time where we need to bring forth ideas, practices, visions, ways of being that resacralize land and reimagine our relationships to each other. And so that when it comes to that, it really is the work of artists. And that's why Tiffany Adams is so critical. And Charlene Eigen-Vasquez, Ohlone, she's actually writing new Rumsen songs right now at Montalvo Art Center. I spoke with her yesterday, beautiful songs, bringing language back, bringing ways of talking and thinking and being that have been purposefully erased and suppressed, as you were saying earlier, with these witch hunts and the ways of knowing that have been purposefully extinguished around how we are in relationship to each other. Our duties of care to each other have been purposefully erased, because you cannot exploit the land, the people, the water, if you care about it, if you have a duty to care that you have to honor. And so when those duties of care were extinguished, that was like an important and critical step. And so how here do we do land back? Those of us who are diasporic, who've been removed from our homelands, from the same processes that caused the orphanhood of people here within their own homelands. How do we do that with, integrity? So I look sometimes at Costa Rica. There's some projects out there where you have a bunch of Americans who've gone down and like, oh, we're resacralizing land, but their practices and presence has made land unavailable to indigenous and native people of Costa Rica. So it becomes very problematic. So I think that it's there have got to be better, new, exciting, imagined partnerships and ways of being together that can offer us possibilities of seeing our mutual humanity, of seeing our practice of recognizing that we are because other people are, because they are in wholeness, because they are able to practice their ways of living that are critical. So that is the work of our Land Back Learning Lab that's going to be launched this year. There'll be classes, it's mostly going to be art. By art, it's like living practices with land and entities from land and our own relationships. And so that's where, like, for me as an artist, as a musician, there are songs that have not been sung yet, that have not been written yet, that are present, that we have to like tune our minds and to listen to them, because those songs have the instructions, have the way that will show us how to move through this time in different ways of relating. Yeah, so I struggle with this all the time, because it's not as easy as, I insist upon land back as a philosophical practice, orientation and practice. And the more I think about it, it's land back to herself, land back to herself. Let her be herself. Let her be sacred to herself. And then what are the ways in which we relate? How do we heal collectively from the violences that have happened? How do we support those people who've been most crushed? And in where I live, that's our California Native people first, and everyone else after that. And how are the ways in which we uplift that when some of those communities are still struggling and so deeply colonized themselves? And so what are our duties and obligations to care? And those are all active, living questions in me right now.
But you know, when I think of the now, you know, there's of course all these historical trajectories, but the now today is, for example, most farmers of the US are old. There are new farmers coming up, and that's the people making a choice of going back to the land. And in my book, Who Really Feeds the World, you know, I looked at the figures. About 50% of the land in the US is owned by the financial system and the banks. Yeah. So it isn't one owner. Yeah. It's this mythical money machine. The second is large numbers of people who had homes are today homeless. Yeah. Beginning with the 2008 crisis. And then there's, of course, the histories of the indigenous people, the histories of the Black people. I think the creativity is how to bring these different strands, you know, into a new solidarity. Because if we can't do that, no matter what we do, we will not make the real change. You know, we will have up spaces, you know, Navania's Million Farmers will be there. But that's why, you know, I think one of, for me, what was, you know, our independence movement, after independence, one of the most creative elements was something called Bhudan. Bhu is the earth, Bhumi. Dan is the gift of the earth. And I think the land back is actually us returning to the earth, you know. We've all been made alien, but returning to the earth and now finding a new way to create the commons with all the separations that divide us. And I think if just a few places, this relationship of gift could be established. I know there are land trusts all over, and you know, and they're doing an amazing job. But I do feel that the multiple crises that divide humanity have to be a new uniting with the earth for the earth.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. And yeah, I hate to break up the dialogue because we're getting somewhere, but I also want to just bring in some other voices. And just given time, maybe the best way to do this, I'm looking at Lynn as well, is we'll bring in 3 or 4 people who could just put their hands up, and if you put your question into the center, and Dr. Marya and Dr. Shiva may or may not respond, but we'll do 3 or 4 together. We'll unmute you and put your video on, and so we can have other voices in, and then we'll do some closing comments where you could address the question if you feel it, and then we have a little surprise, which is Alixa García, who's one of the main artists in the Post-Capitalist Philanthropy book, who did a lot of the visual art. Is going to read us a poem. She's also an amazing poet, and she's been listening to this 2-hour dialogue and weaving pieces together. And so we want to save a few minutes for that at the end. And of course, if people have to jump off at the end of the hour, please do, and it'll be recorded, and we'll send this out into the world. But we'll start with hands, and if there aren't many hands, then let's see. We can. Oh, we do. Okay, so we have, maybe we'll start Suzanne, and then Jay, and then Michelle, and those are the first 3, and we'll leave it at that.
Thank you for that awesome question, because this is actually on the edge of our understanding as well, and dynamics and issues. So trust, so identity, right? So identity is something I've been thinking about a lot. We've had a lot of white passing people of color, Native, Mexican, whatever, like many different things, come forward and take over and hijack and sabotage the work of community serving groups. So it becomes problematic, right? So it's like, can you just, identity politics is important. There was a language that was important there. And then there's a dysfunctionality there when we're not looking at what the underlying politics are. What is the underlying arrangements of power, which is what you're getting at. There's also a challenge because in the rush to want to be community, well, the community governance is critical. However, flattened structures, so there's this, oh, we just need everything to be flattened. A lot of our movement elders are coming in and being like, are you crazy? Because they're, you know, these are people in their 70s and 80s who walked with Martin Luther King Jr. and being like, no, we actually need the expertise of elders who know how to take care of this land. We actually need them teaching the young people. We actually need ways of teaching and organizing that aren't toxic. So what does leadership look like that is not toxic? What do hierarchies look like that aren't toxic? What are all hierarchies suspect? Do we have to have completely flattened, structures? And that's a question. That's a real question. Yeah, and so these are, I think, things. There was that great article that Maurice wrote called Building Resilient Organizations. I don't know if you all saw it, but everyone should be reading it like 5 times because in that he outlines some of the main political, ideological problems, thought problems that we're seeing in movement spaces on the left. And this is something one of our elders, Walter Riley, early in the year, as we were watching some like really troubling dynamics come up in our organization, he sat down and outlined actually every single one of these things. And when, Roe v. Wade was trashed, he came to me and he said, the reason why we have no effective movement right now is because of these same thought patterns that we're seeing throughout left movement spaces. So I think it's really important that we are able to grapple and do some self-analysis on where we are ineffective, where we are taking important ideas and misappropriating them, where we are leading with a kind of purism that is making effective achievement of political realities like the movement of land to the hands of different kinds of people, like the allocation of resources to be able to get people fed and housed. So like the concrete objectives. And so I think that the trust building should really not be around identity. It should be around political alignment. Are we in political alignment? Do we have an understanding of what our ideological principles are? Are we working to create radical solidarity? Are we there to, rip down each other because we're not, from this group or that group or, and so how do we do that? Those are really big questions, and it's really important that we grapple with them. But I think that part of that is a lack of political literacy on the part of movement spaces and organizations. And I give all props to Walter Riley, my elder, who I love dearly. I will cry so hard. I already told him he's 78 years old. I was like, I'm going to miss you so much. I was crying. He's like, why are you throwing me off the bus? I'm not dying. I'm like, we're going to be screwed without you. We need those elders right now. I feel like we need to have symposiums where we bring movement elders in the same space as movement young people, and they just need to hand us some information, because I don't think we know what we're doing the way that they knew what they're doing, and they have that knowledge built up. So I'm with you here. I don't think it's all about collectively run organizations, because I've seen a lot of garbage happen there. I don't think it's all about, definitely not all about identity. However, I think it is important to work with groups that you trust in terms of political alignment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry, Dr. Shiva, what I was going to do is ask Jay and Michelle to put their questions in, and then you can decide which of the three, unless you want to say something first. And then
no, I just wanted to say, if we apply the ontology of separation and radical solidarity, not just to how we relate to the earth and nature, but how we identify ourselves. And, I wrote Earth Democracy, and I wrote India Divided. I wrote India Divided after 9/11, because we watched in India colonialism creating negative, antagonistic, fragmented identities. And when they were, saying you have to put a religion and you have to put only one religion, because people would say, I'm a Hindu Muslim. I go to a mosque and I go to a temple. And first I'm a gardener, No, you can't just put gardener. Remove all that, only religion and only mutually exclusive religion. And for 3 or 4 censuses, they just did not get it. But then they forced people, they'd punish them, they'd fine them, etc. And then, of course, the whole politics of divide and rule emerged from there. But if we were to connect what we are doing in ecology with what our social politics has to be, I think our first identity is beings of the earth, And I think every group that is focusing on identity politics in a fragmented, in a separated way, needs to just say, okay, what's my earth identity? Yeah. And how does that make me have solidarity with all beings in the soil as well as everyone else? And how do we find new ways? How do we find new ways of solidarity? So it's only our earth being and our earth identity which will show us a way to fight the injustices and create a just world.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. So we're going to let Jay and Michelle go back to back and not answer, and then we'll go a little bit over if that's okay with you, Dr. Shiva and Dr. Marya.
Yeah, and then we wrap.
And then we wrap, yeah. And then Alixa is going to close us out with a poem. So closing comments after these 2 questions. Thank you, Jay. And then Michelle, why don't you put your question in the middle, and then we'll have closing comments by Dr. Shiva and Marya.
That question goes to one of the ones that was just asked about identity politics, which I think is such a really important point to make. So this last year, there was a Black farmer who called me anti-Black because I said I was against capitalism that worked for Black people. That's like the prime example. Now I'm anti-capitalist. I will work to dismantle capitalism. I don't want capitalism that works for anybody. And this goes to the previous question is like, how do we use these systems to build the new world? That's the question, instead of entrenching ourselves in dependency upon the flow of funds. And that is about creating alternative economies to use those funds to create economics of care. What does that look like in terms of getting access? You know, there's many different ways and structures we could do that with. The way we're envisioning it for Farming as Medicine in our work, our small little microcosm work, is to get public funds. That communities should fund farmers in the peri-urban environment to feed the communities in the urban environment and to take care of the soils and the water in the peri-urban environment, and that we should support people who've been historically excluded from good land relationships and food relationships to do that work. So paying farmers like doctors and nurses, paying them to be in service of community, and then mobilizing that food, not for the capitalist economy, but for the health, for universal basic nutrition for everybody. So it's inventing, thinking, dreaming, creating, and this is where the art comes in, right? So how do we create these economies of care? We don't see them in our world right now, in our big world, the world that, you know, most of us live in who have computers to be on Zoom. But absolutely no, we must fight back about capitalism that works for indigenous people and capitalism that works for women and all that. Like all of it will damage the earth and damage our relationships ultimately. And it needs to be put to the fire.
Shiva, you can close this out. Thank you, Rupa. And I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, I think just as solutionism is not a solution, working in the short term on the limitations that it creates are not going to help us find the path to the just transition of being one as humanity and one as the earth. And I think our creativity is, you know, we are in a situation where what were means have become ends. Technology was a mean, tools are means. Technology is today's religion. Money was always a means. There were other ends, higher values, more justice, more solidarity, more compassion, more caring. Money has become the end. And I think if in all our practices, we can use these means as means and constantly grow the true ends of being human on a living earth, we will find our way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. I know it's almost midnight in India.
It is. Good night. Good night,
thank you so much,
and
Rupa.
see you in Dehradun. Bye-bye.
See you in Dehradun.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So for those of you who can stay on, please do. I think Lynn is just going to wrap us up, and Alixa is going to read a poem for us.
Yeah, with our gratitude to our two beloved speakers who've had to go and tend nighttime and hospital, we just wanted to remind of the next webinar series, which Adam put in the chat. And I believe, I'm so entranced in these questions. I believe it's February 17th. It's another Friday, same time, because we haven't yet gone through the time change. And we'll have two beloved guests, Tiokas and Ghost Horse, a Lakota elder, and Vanessa Andreatti, who's a incredible Brazilian author and who also is speaking about these transition pathways. And so you'll get a reminder both in your calendar or if you're still on our email chain. And so we want to, the way that art was uplifted and the way that Alnoor and I thought about that, of art, of life force, of recultivating our relationship with life itself being at the center of all of our transition pathways. We wanted to invite our beloved co-conspirator, and one whose art is in the book, to bring in voice as well, and poetry. And with that, after that's finished, we'll close the webinar for today. So thank you all for what was spoken, what wasn't spoken, the questions that are in your heart, and what you're continuing to walk away with. And thank you for the gift of listening.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Beautiful. The human body is made of 37 trillion cells. There's 8 billion humans on Earth. There's 16 billion hands to do the work of undoing the disconnection, which brings us to the now, of instant gratification and perpetual forgetfulness. The disease of loneliness is spreading like an epidemic that leaves a single tree standing where there was once a forest. My journey through life is a lot like yours, carried by 100,000 miles of blood vessels pumping life into lungs that take in 5% of oxygen, but it's getting hard to breathe. So much so that we can YouTube various forms of strangulation. I can't breathe has moved the consciousness of a nation. I wonder how it will move its feet. Oil companies make $100 billion a year. The observable universe has 100 billion galaxies. Human fallacy would like us to believe that the truth of our wholeness comes from the little things we can see. But the truth is that whether or not you can see stars in your night sky, if you're standing just right, 2,000 stars are visible to the unaided eye. We travel 584 million miles around the sun in 1 year, orbiting one star. Our galaxy holds 300 billion. The poetry of the unknown is written in the indescribable. We're unfolding pages from the universal Bible. Galaxies, they move towards each other. Like souls not yet born know when to return to meet their lover. Andromeda is moving towards the Milky Way at 250,000 miles per hour, a speed that would get us to the moon in just under an hour. We won't be there when they collide. Our sun will long have faded, but when they do, they will be mirrors of what we used to do when love dipped into the divine, before the divide in us became more than the great pretending of current human history. Change is constant, like the universe is expanding, and this time is asking us to expand into dream weavers, bridge builders, truth sayers, light bearers, food growers, wound healers, trailblazers, life lovers, peacemakers. Give what you most deeply desire to give. Every moment you are choosing to live or you are waiting. Why would a flower hesitate to open? Now is the only moment. Raindrop, let go, become the ocean. Possibility is as wide as the space we create to hold it. The stars, they have spent lifetimes trying to reach us with the message that our light can inspire solar systems if we let it shine like the moon's reflection of her sons and daughters, great-great-grandmothers and fathers, foretold this time of great blessing and slaughter, where we decide between drought and drowning in water, or rising like mist from rivers toxic with dreams, to be clouds that give birth to rain water and fall pure to the earth, to quench this thirst we'd forgotten, is the reason we struggle in this web that we're caught in. It's not a trap, but an intricate pattern, like a labyrinth, a snowflake or crystal of water, or the concentric rings of a tree that still make a sound long after it's fallen, in a forest that lived even if no one saw it, and fed the world its breath. Whether or not we applauded, Man, one hand clapping sounds a lot like the rhythms we lost in generations who sang even as they departed. Yes, we paved concrete over the pores of the earth to make our lives harder and build buildings to scrape skies, trying to get closer to God, but move farther from the source that birthed the first light in the darkness. We stole from our mother and we continue to rob her for diamonds and gold, and our ancestors' bones disappeared from their coffins, turned hollow so they could fly with the weight of the fodder on their wings, and now dust inside the brain got us caught up thinking pain was our fate. But this is what we said that we wanted. Whether we knew it or not, the universe responded. To every vision and image and nightmare we've thought up, our words are like bullets and we call the shots by their names. And they come running with gifts in their pockets. Impressions of lessons of the stories life taught us that our dreams are impossible, so we keep them in closets. But now we stand at this doorway. In the hallway life brought us to this crossroad of lost hope and undeniable promise, where we choose between paths beyond rightness or wrongness, beyond the age of compassion, beyond rightness and wrongness, that will lead to the brink of the planet's exhaustion, or the age of compassion where the meek become strongest and re-inherit the earth and redefine progress. So don't be scared of the spark in the spell of great darkness, or afraid of the light in the moment of dawning, where the heights you will reach when you rise to your calling and release all your rain. Call it flying or falling. Let go of your wanting and give in to your longing to live free of possessions and full of belonging to the intricate infinite. We're all a part of the web that you wove in a dream you'd forgotten was the creator in you awakening into your consciousness, condensation of vapor into a droplet of water. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Alnoor. Thank you for this book. Thank you for having me in it. My name is Alixa García, and thank you for being here with us. Ciao.
I wasn't going to say anything, but we have to say Amen, Amin, Hallelujah, Shukran, Ikikai, Ashe. Thank you, Megan.
Hasta luego.
See you all on the 17th, inshallah.